Chapter 7, The Miserable Life of Bernie LeBaron, The Sweet Scent of Sorrow. The next day, I tried to escape the trailer park without the stupid white helmet, but Aunt Elsie caught me on the way out the door. "Don't let me catch you without this on," she said as she shoved it none too gently into my gut. "I had a kid with a head injury the other day, and now he's a vegetable. Wear the helmet." She was pretty feisty for somebody so small. What could I do? I put the helmet on until I was out of the trailer park. Then I stopped and hid it in the trees. I'd rather die than wear that thing to school. I could pick it up when I came home. That day, Miss Riley started out by asking us why history was important. Of course, no one had any idea. I mean, most 8th graders haven't lived long enough to experience much history, so how would we know? Let me give you an example, she said. "Madison, if I asked you to tell me about yourself, what would you say?" Madison looked around, pleased by having been selected. "I'm Irish," she said, "and I've been to Mexico." "Keep going," Miss Riley said. I like horses and cheerleading." "Okay, now tell me which of those things has no connection to history." Madison looked around again. "Anyone care to help her?" Tatiana raised her hand. "Yes." "Everything has a history," Tatiana said in a kind of bored voice. "Exactly! No part of who you are or who you think you are can be divorced from the past that created it. Take Ireland, for example. When did Ireland come into existence? How many different types of Irish are there?" She paused and scanned the room. "You see, your entire identity is made up of bits and pieces of the past you have stolen to create your sense of self." That's where my brain began to overheat. I kept watching her anyway. I couldn't help myself. Still, what she said about how the past made us who we were stuck with me. I mean, was I going to be like my father because of what had happened to me? Was that the bit of the past I was going to steal to create my identity? I didn't like the idea. That was the last thing I wanted to be. But the thought wouldn't leave me alone. I mean, did I even have a choice which part of the past would make me who I was going to be? In English, Mrs. Grimm started out on a rampage. "I am not going to tolerate the sloppy use of the helpless English language to which your generation has become accustomed. Write down the 6 rules I have written on the board. If you make any of these mistakes, you'll receive a failing grade for the entire written assignment." We all scribbled them down. 1. A run-on sentence or sentence fragment is the sign of an empty brain. 2. Capitalize the letter I when it is used as a noun or suffer the fires of Hades. 3. Don't use contractions in formal writing. "You're right, I used it twice because this isn't formal writing." "Oh, that was 3 times. 4. If you think I'm going to read texting language, you just failed this class. 5. Until has one L, not 2. So don't screw it up. 6. Impact is not a verb. Every time you use it that way, an angel dies. She paced like a drill sergeant while we scratched the rules into our notebooks. When we finished, she continued, "You now have 40 minutes to write a 2-page essay about what you did for the summer. And remember, if you break one of these rules, I'll throw the grade book at you." I wrote about my game cameras. I wasn't about to tell her that my mom died and my own father gave me up before the last school year had even ended. That's not the kind of thing you want people to know about you. I considered writing about the murderer in the swamp, but I figured she wouldn't believe me. In science, Mr. Woolley started with the building blocks of cells, which I already knew. I watched Tatiana push her hair behind her ears. She had a way of doing it that I liked for some reason. I guess I'm just a psycho. In health class, they showed us disturbing pictures of what drugs and alcohol did to the body. Pretty gruesome stuff. After they showed us the black lungs, one girl asked to be excused so she wouldn't have nightmares. I went to my locker before lunch to find Brock and his gang lounging around like they were waiting for me. I considered skipping lunch until the fact that this jerk wouldn't leave me alone made my blood boil. I strode up to my locker anyway and started running through my combination. "Think you're tough, don't you?" Brock said. I ignored him. He stepped closer. "I'm talking to you, trailer trash." I dumped my books in my locker and closed the door as I turned to face him. He was a good foot taller than me, and he had a bunch of his buddies to back him up. I looked up at him. I'm not gonna lie. I started feeling weak in the knees, and I broke out in a sweat. I figured now was the time to use my brain since I didn't have any brawn. "You got bats in your cave," I said. "Pretty gross." Brock looked confused as I pushed my way past his friends. I swear, A couple of them were snickering. I glanced back to find him picking his nose. What a chump. He wasn't going to give up so easily. Brock and his crew were waiting for me as I pedaled past the park on my paper route. I saw them before they saw me, and I used my head start to get to Zinnia's before they could catch up with me. I ditched the bike in her bushes and knocked on the door. Marigold answered. "Danny! Danny!" she cried like she hadn't seen me in years. She threw the door open and grabbed me up in a bear hug that squeezed the air right out of my lungs. Then she dragged me back into the house, crying like she had just lost her best friend. All I could think about was that gray ooze coming out of her eye and how I didn't want it to get on my face. "Mother," Zinnia said, coming out of the kitchen with a towel in her hands. "It's okay. Let him go." Marigold released me and I pulled away. Zinnia wrapped her arms around Marigold and hugged her tight while Marigold sobbed into her shoulder. I poked a thumb toward the door while I tried to catch my breath. Zinnia nodded. "Keep your head down and go have some cookies. Mom just took a batch out of the oven." Several warm, chewy cookies had already found their way into my stomach by the time Zinnia returned from distracting Marigold with the garden. While I munched, I decided to ask her what it was like to live alone with her mom. Zinnia smiled sadly. "It's not so bad," she said. "I do get lonely sometimes, though. You know, I used to work full-time, but when Mom started showing signs of Alzheimer's, I had to choose." She turned the cup of milk around and around. I couldn't send the woman who had raised me and loved me into a cage to spend her last days in loneliness and confusion. She doesn't have long to live now anyway. Why not let her enjoy her flowers and her independence? I nodded. If I could have kept my mom alive, I would have done anything. Anything. In fact, I was kind of jealous of Zinnia. She had been able to watch her mom grow old and get a wrinkly face. I never would. "How's school?" Zinnia asked. Do you like living in Hazelwood?" I shrugged. "Could be worse." I thought of Dad and how he used to yell all the time. I never did know why he was always so angry. Sometimes I thought it was because of us kids. I mean, he didn't like any of us, and once he accused my mom of having too many kids. Zinnia nodded. "Well, that's usually true no matter where you live." "I guess so." I said. "Well, I'd better get my papers delivered." Zinnia nodded and reached for my plate. "Wait just a minute," she said. She put the cookies and milk away and then came back to me. "Come here," she said. I followed her out into the huge flower garden they had in back of their little cottage. I had never seen so many flowers in one place in my life. Not even in a flower shop. The perfume from a gazillion flowers assaulted my poor, helpless nostrils. It made me want to gag. She stepped over to a patch of delicate pink flowers and lifted one in between her fingers. "These are zinnias," she said. "Do you know how to grow them?" I shook my head because I didn't know how to grow anything. All the seeds I tried to grow in those science projects just turned to mold. I followed all the directions, but it didn't matter. "They like lots of sunlight," Zinnia said, "and warmth and rich soil. And they like to grow in bunches like they need each other. But when it freezes like it's going to do in a few weeks, all of these zinnias will die." She looked at me as if I was supposed to derive some deeper meaning from this. I nodded, not wanting to appear stupid. "They're pretty," I said. She smiled. I guess she knew what I was thinking again. "People are a lot like zinnias, Bernie," she said. "They need warmth and friendship. They don't do well alone, and when relationships freeze over, people can die inside." I didn't know why she was telling me this. Her words made me think of my father and mother, and I wondered for the first time if their relationship had frozen over. Maybe that's why Mom cried all the time. I had never had a real relationship with my dad. Sometimes I had a cloudy memory of him holding me on his knee and laughing, but that was the only one. He just ignored me mostly. When he noticed me at all, it was usually to yell or to tell me to do something. I guess our relationship couldn't freeze over or die. It had never been born. Zinnia continued. "That's why I quit my job, Bernie," she said. "To care for my mother. People are worth it." I bent down to smell the zinnias. I don't know how to explain it. They just smelled sad to me, like they had been given a bum rap in the world. I looked up at Zinnia in surprise, but I don't think they smelled that way to her because she was smiling. That scent of sorrow followed me through the rest of my paper route.